Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience, and I apologize again for the delay. Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for being here. I apologize for the delay, and we are starting now. It's going to be a fascinating panel. I'm looking forward to it. So Shabbat Shalom again. My name is Esti Burke. I'm a senior director at IAC, and I'm very grateful to have this room full of people. Thank you for being here. I would like to invite Consul General of Israel in New York, Ophir Akunis.
שלום לכם, בוקר טוב. Ambassadors, גם רונן פה, נכון? Ambassador. שלום לכולם. Shabbat Shalom. Before I'll say a few words, I just want to pray for our brave soldiers. מי שברך אבותינו, אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, הוא יברך את חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל וכוחות הביטחון העומדים על משמר ארצנו מגבול הלבנון, it's right now, ועד מדבר מצרים, it's also right now, ומן הים הגדול עד לבוא הערבה, actually it's everywhere, ביבשה, באוויר ובים. We are very proud of them and we salute them from here. Thank you. So Shabbat Shalom again and good morning. With your permission, ambassadors, it is a privilege to address IAC's Washington Summit for the second time. For 17 years, this organization has represented the unbreakable bond between the US and Israel, the rich history of that special relationship, and the bright future awaiting us as we continue working together. The values we share have made America Israel's closest ally since the earliest days of the Jewish state. We owe a tremendous debt to generations of American leadership. The first, President Truman. He was the first world leader to recognize the modern state of Israel just minutes after its founding. And I want to be more specific. It took 11 minutes after it declared independence in Tel Aviv by our first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. We will never forget it. And you know, Truman, he did it despite fierce internal and external opposition. Well, he was a real leader. His courage changed the course of history. And with your permission, I will share with you a few examples of this bond briefly. In 1973, President Nixon would extend a lifeline to Israel as it faced a tidal wave of enemies trying to wipe it off the map in the Yom Kippur War, from almost a loss to big victory. 5 years later, in 1978, President Carter would oversee the Camp David Accord, opening the door to peace between Israel and its neighbors. He showed, with the partnership and vision of two great leaders, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, that peace is possible. Peace is possible if both sides truly want it. In recent years, President Trump would fulfill the promise of moving the American embassy to Jerusalem and and recognize it as Israel's eternal capital, along with Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights. Well, I want to say to all of you, none of us, believe me, don't want to imagine a different situation on the Golan Heights these days. An Arab army instead of the IDF? This is impossible. And most recently, President Biden would make a vital visit of solidarity to Israel just days after October 7th massacre. Thank you, you're right. We appreciate it so much. We appreciate it. Well, you know, Hamas sent thousands of its elite, they called it Nukhbas, forces, not to fight soldiers on a battlefield, but to gun down hundreds of young people at a music festival, to burn families alive in their living rooms, rape women, and slaughter children. Well, it was an act of the devil, not of human beings. We will never forgive Hamas brutality, and we will never forget America's support. Thank you very much, America. My friends, after Al-Qaeda carried out the deadliest terror attack in history on September 11, 2001, Israel stood firmly with the US. We remain the only country in the world outside America to construct a memorial bearing the names of every single victim. It stands to this day in Jerusalem. On the other hand, and this is very important, on September 11th itself, footage quickly circulated of Palestinians celebrating and handing out sweets. They laughed and they cheered as America mourned. Well, the same people who supported Al-Qaeda then support Hamas now. These are enemies of Israel, enemies of the United States and the Western civilization. And I want to ask you, and I want you all to know and say to your friends, Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, still hasn't condemned the terror attack of October 7th. This is unbelievable. Shame on him. Well, our October 7th is America's September 11th, not just in the scale of the attacks, but in what it revealed about the world. After the Hamas attacks, those protesting against us somehow always ended up burning not just Israeli, but American flags. Israelis, Jews, and our supporters responded not with the same hatred, but by proudly waving American and Israeli flags together. Yeah? It's here. Now you can see it. Okay, I will leave it here. It's always here. It's on my desk, in my bureau. It's here. It's everywhere. This is, by the way, unbelievable pictures. As they burn, we wave. As Israel picked up the pieces from Hamas's brutal onslaught, it was American Zionists and Jews who jumped into action, donating money, time, and willpower, and in many cases, enlisting or returning as lone soldiers to join the fight on the ground. Well, this is the glue of our people. This is the beauty of the Jewish nation, the American spirit, and the US-Israel relationship. Yes, we are independent nations. As with all secure democracies, we respect that each other's electoral results reflect the will of the people. We are also deeply tied together with shared values, shared faith, shared history, and hopes of a beautiful shared future. And I always say, the United States and Israel are the two great miracles of the modern age. Nevertheless, the threats against our security, prosperity, sovereignty, and the way of life are many. Indeed, the modern axis of evil threatens the death to us both every single day. Well, Iran is the head of the snake of terror, and Israel is on the front lines of its attack. As crowds in Tehran, Beirut, Gaza, Ramallah, Nablus, Hebron chant, "Death to America," and "Death to Israel," they have also begun exporting this hate to the streets right here in New York, here in Washington, a few minutes after the Prime Minister's speech. They chant the same things. Well, my friends, if they want so much to destroy America, why are they here? And I will tell you, they are using the American democracy to destroy it. And we will not let them. Now, yes, we will not let them. Well, my friends, now is the time to choose democracy or destruction, Israel or Iran, peace or pain, darkness of light, where our brave soldiers will defeat Hamas and its Iranian proxies, because we know that the fate of the world rests on our shoulders. And we will do it. Israel will defeat Hamas like the United States defeated Al-Qaeda. I want to end, and I want to say in the name of, on behalf of all the Israeli citizens, the same things that Moses said to Pharaoh. He was a brave leader, Moses. He went to the palace and he said to Pharaoh, let my people go. And we are saying it right now, right here, everywhere. Let them go. Let them go. What is it? What is it? To kidnap citizens, to invade Israel in Simchat Torah, to kidnap them to Gaza, the year of 2023. We call on the world to stand with us, stand with Israel, to force Hamas to let our people go. I hope, like the Jewish pray בראש השנה, תכלה שנה וקללותיה, תחל שנה וברכותיה, שנה טובה עם ישראל. עם ישראל חי, עם ישראל חי, and will always live, will always live. תודה רבה, שבת שלום. תודה רבה לכם. Thank you. תודה רבה.
Thank you, Consul General Ophir Akunis. I'm very proud to present our great panelist and our moderate for this panel, Yuna Leibzon, U.S. correspondent in the U.S. for the Channel 12 News in Israel.
Thank you. Please be seated. I'll introduce our panelists for today. Dennis Ross, Ambassador, Counsel, and Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute. Michael Oren, founder of Israeli Advocacy Group, former Israeli Ambassador to the United States. And Victoria Coates, Vice President for the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation, and former Deputy National Security Advisor for President Trump. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, everybody who's waiting. And the title for this panel is The U.S.-Israel Alliance Now and Tomorrow, a subject that is so relevant, was relevant. It always seems like it doesn't matter where Israel is, where the U.S. is. It's a topic that we follow all the time, but I do think that we all understand that in these days, and these critical days, there's a special meaning to see how we can preserve that, how we would look at the future, and can it be bipartisan as it was for so many years. So I'll have a spoiler. They all get along. So I know they're not going to fight over it, but we're going to try to have a good conversation and try to see what kind of insights we can have on that. So we don't have a lot of time. So Michael, I want to start with you. And you know, it's always a bad idea to be at war during an election season in the U.S. That's always true. And as someone who served as the Israeli ambassador here to Washington, how do you think this affects the war, the U.S.-Israeli relations, the fact that we're so close to elections? How do you see it?
Hey, first of all, still, Boker Tov. Thank you, everybody. I check and see if it's still morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Well, it is a very poignant question right now. First of all, generally, the lay of the land, U.S.-Israel relationships in 2024. Yes, we've always said, and can't hear? Can't any closer than this. We've always prided ourselves by saying that support for Israel was the only truly bipartisan issue in Washington, and we still strive for that. There are two schools already, I think, certainly in Israel speaking. The first school says, yes, that bipartisan support for Israel is a strategic national interest for the state of Israel, and we must do everything possible to preserve it. Another school says it's too late. It's gone. And that if we have limited resources, we should invest them in our base, whether it's a conservative Orthodox Jewish base or evangelical base. And I'll tell you that the burden of proof is on the first school now, not on the second school. I, of course, subscribe to the first school and always have, but it's difficult. And so we have to strive to maintain that sense of bipartisanship. And that is good. That is the case even not in election year, Yuna, but during election year it becomes a particularly acute challenge, particularly in issues, and I'll speak very frankly, when you have swing states like Michigan, where you have large populations who are not exactly enamored of the Jewish state and are accusing the administration of being too pro-Israel, even the New York Times of being too pro-Israel, get that? And where the policymakers in government today are determined at pretty much any price to prevent the United States from getting dragged into a regional conflict. I spent the last 4 days with a delegation from the north of displaced people. We've been in the House, in the Senate, both parties. We were in the White House yesterday, and one of the messages we brought, and not everyone wants to hear this, is guess what? We've been in a regional war since last October. And there are people saying, well, don't escalate now. Excuse me? Hezbollah has been escalating since October 8th. But still, there's a tremendous desire not to get dragged into that war, and that has repercussions for the U.S.-Israel relationship at this very, very critical time. It is not easy. One of the transformations that have been affected by the elections has been what I call the budding of Israel, of American support for Israel. B-U-T, not one T, two T's, one T. We support Israel's right to exist and Israel's right to defend itself, but it depends how it does it. We support Israel's right to exist and defend itself, but there must be a creation of a Palestinian state. We support Israel's right to defend itself and exist, but there must be an end to this war and a hostage release, and which would be problematic in and of itself. But all those buts are probably not attainable. So it qualifies the support for the existence and support of Israel in a very troubling way. And I think this is the great challenge that will be posed to people in my camp who still seek to maintain bipartisanship, to somehow grapple with the but and erase it.
So, Victoria, we've heard President Trump talking just here at the convention. We've heard him say that basically Israel has to pick a side, and that's his side, obviously, as he sees it. Also, he's talking about Jews here in the U.S. And do you think there's still a chance to be bipartisan regarding to Israel? And this is the rhetoric when also the former president is using, and we see that throughout the campaigns, and each side is trying to make why they are sometimes better for Israel, better for Jews. It's becoming such a heated discussions within the current climate.
It is, but I think our presence here today demonstrates that it can be bipartisan. It should be bipartisan, and part of my work is simply to make the factual case of why the U.S.-Israel relationship is simply such a enormous benefit to both of us, that we institutionalize it. And one of the things we worked on in the Trump administration that I initiated and then my successor on the NSC actually completed was a U.S.-Israel strategy. We had never had one. And I'm going to date myself here, but I was 20 years old when the State of Israel was founded, and it's now 76. That's a very different place for a country to be. And as we look at the next 25 years of getting to the 100th anniversary of the... I appreciate that, Sarah. Getting to the 100th anniversary of the alliance, I think taking that strategic view is really necessary. And so President Trump did sign that strategy in December of 2020. It is, I think, a nonpartisan document that could be dusted back off and put back into place. So as I said, this becomes institutionalized, and that's really my goal going forward. You know, I'm a Christian, I have my reasons for loving Israel, but that's not my reason for supporting this alliance. It's the national security interests of the United States.
So, Dennis, you see the current relations between this administration and Israel. We have a right-wing government. We see, on one hand, big support. On the one hand, there's always this frictions. Is this something different than what we've seen before, or it's always been like that? We have a very short memory. Also, during Trump administrations, you know, the U.S. and Israel don't always agree. That's just the way that it works. Or do you see now something that is different, especially during the war?
No, you know, I can date myself too. Look, the reality is, one of the books I wrote was called Doomed to Succeed, the U.S.-Israeli relationship from Truman to Obama. And what I did there is trace what were the policies and the set of assumptions that existed in every administration. Ophir Okunis talked about what Harry Truman faced. He overcame the absolutely united opposition of the entire national security bureaucracy, including the only five-star general we've ever had, who was Secretary of State. Richard Nixon, which he cited in '73, the unbelievable amount of arms that we sent to Israel, we waited 1 week before we provided any of the arms. I can go through and cite chapter and verse where there were disagreements, including with administrations that were seen legitimately as being very close to Israel. The George W. Bush administration was an unbelievably strong friend of the State of Israel. But look at the behavior during the Lebanon War. Look at the imposition of a Security Council resolution, 1701, that was, in a sense, forced on Israel, and which has never been actually fulfilled in terms of responsibilities. So it's easy for people to be riveted on the moment and see only the sources of friction and not to see, okay, we are two countries. Victoria put it well, and I like the notion of institutionalization. Now I will date myself. There was a concept known as strategic cooperation. Up until the Reagan administration, Israel was supported on the basis of values, but not on the basis of interests. I was one of the authors of strategic cooperation in the Reagan administration, and the principle of this was to say, look, yes, we will always have shared values, and that is the pillar of the relationship. We should not diminish that in any way. Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East, period. Okay, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. We will always and should always have a commitment to Israel because of that. But it's also easier to rationalize at times, reminding people, and this is what Victoria was getting at, Israel also is a national security interest of the United States. So it's a combination of both of these. Are we facing challenges that Michael was talking about? Yes, we are. And it's a demographic issue here. The younger generation in this country has not been forged with a set of understandings or memories about Israel. Palestinians have had a strategy of being a victim and emphasizing victimization. I've often said Palestinians actually are victims, but it's a condition. They turned it into a strategy. The problem when you make being a victim a strategy is it guarantees you will always be a victim. So that imagery of Palestinian victimization is what you see on the campuses. I teach, I will speak at 20 campuses this year around the country. I know what I see when I'm there. There is a reservoir of misinformation, and unfortunately, a lot of it comes from the faculties, and it requires a kind of dedicated effort to make the case. But also, Israel has a responsibility to help us make that case. It can't be only Americans who believe in this relationship. Israel, too, has a responsibility to reach out. It has a responsibility to tell its story. It has a responsibility to show it embodies these values. Obviously, you have certain members of the current coalition who create a challenge when it comes to that. But again, I don't want people here to think, yes, we have a responsibility, and people like us who believe in this will fight for it. But Israel also has to help us. They have to reach out to younger people here.
But Dennis, that's something that Israel, the U.S., that can even be changed, because as Michael says, some people would say it's already lost. We need to, we can't tackle everything and this is not something that we need to focus. And some people would say, we have some better allies maybe in Congress or around the world, and this demography is changing. We would not get the same support within, for example, the Democratic Party as we had before, and maybe it's not an effort that we should do. What do you think about that?
The problem is when you adopt that position, you make the problem a self-fulfilling prophecy. You guarantee that a younger generation will never see Israel in a better way. Why will I spend time going to 20 campuses this year? Precisely because there's a battle to be fought. And the truth is, there is a small percentage on the campuses who are activists, and their opposition to Israel's existence is part of their identity. They're not persuadable. The vast majority of the students, by the way, they don't know. They don't know, and they need to hear. And by the way, because they have a kind of curiosity, they are persuadable. This is not necessarily something that you can assume you have no way to affect it. No, it can be affected, but you have to recognize the problem and recognize the responsibility to deal with it.
Victor, yes, you want to add?
Just to add one point on that is that we have to be humble about it. I think, Yuna, we did not originate wokeism or intersectionality or critical race theory, and yet we're on the receiving end of so many of these ideas. So we have to be humble about what we can impact. But that does not excuse us from the imperative, as Dennis says, of fighting back. And even the chance of changing the minds of a small group of people, it is incumbent upon us to actually do that. Dennis speaks on campuses, I speak on campuses. I go on TV every night. It's not necessarily thankful. As you say, people say, why are you doing this? You're not going to change the mind of the people who watch MSNBC or CNN. And I say, listen, I have to say, if I can change the mind of 5% of the people, if I can change the mind of 7% of the people and put it in the most concrete terms, that gives time and space for the IDF to defend us. And I really put it in that terms. What we need is time and space. And Dennis is right. If you look at the polls, including a recent Harvard poll, 81% of the students on campus think that the 8% of the people who are protesting should be punished. So it's not as if we have to preach we're going up against the mass of people who are against Israel. It's not true. And that's true of American public opinion in general. It's specific campuses and it's specific audiences, particularly the people who watch, say, for example, BBC. They're already there. But you go to fight, because that also impacts American policy making, because the people who are making those policies are watching these channels. And the protests on campus have I think, exaggerated gravitational pull on policy. So we can't afford to ignore them. You go out and fight. You may not be able to win 100%, win 7%, and I call that a victory.
Thank you. Victoria, I want to ask you, how does the world, especially the Arab world, see the U.S.-Israel alliance? It's something that is so important for this to be bipartisan, and how does the world look at it, and how do they see it right now? Because we've heard so many times before from American officials, Israeli officials, there should not be no daylight between Israel and the U.S., and it seems that the daylight is getting through there. How do they see it? What do you hear?
Well, this is sort of a backhanded way to go about this, but I've heard from some Arab partners in the region that they've actually been commiserating with the Israelis that this is what it's like when America is not fully with you. Welcome to the club. And it does not make me unhappy to have Israel in that club. But to Michael's point, I think one thing I just wanted to add to that, and it's to Dennis's as well, that the United States and Israel play a unique role. We just heard, these are the unique countries, but we see it as a beautiful, wonderful thing that they're both countries inspired by an idea, both democracies, vibrant, much more successful than we probably should have been. But in critical race theory, this is settler colonialism. We are both fundamentally illegitimate states, and that's what you're hearing from the most extreme groups that Dennis describes on campus. And I just had the pleasure of going through some of these curricula and reading the peer-reviewed. Yeah, it was fun. I learned a lot. That these states are illegitimate, that indigenous peoples were displaced, and there's a whole realm of international law that addresses this. And that has become dominant in the most elevated parts of our academia. And I think that's what we really have to clarify, that we just reject this out of hand, and that both the United States and Israel have to be those aspirational nations that countries in the Gulf want to partner with. And that, was the great thing about the Abraham Accords. We were all very supportive of any deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Whomever completes that deal, it'll be a wonderful, wonderful day for humanity because of what it says about the spread of tolerance and peace. And so I think the Arab world is somewhat confused to see all of these protests in London, New York, and Los Angeles, while the so-called Arab Street is rather remarkable for its calm. That is an amazing juxtaposition. And so I think, as I said, they're somewhat befuddled, but at the same time, there is still an openness to expanding, peace deals, expanding cooperation.
Michael, what does the Israeli government need to do in order to keep the Israeli issue, the U.S.-Israel alliance, a bipartisan issue? I mean, this is part of used to be at least, Israel's strategy that Israel is above American politics.
I think we should have to always, in every decision we make, strategic, tactical, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what are the ramifications of this decision on the United States and American politics? That doesn't mean that in order to satisfy certain contingents in the American political spectrum, we should immediately withdraw from Judea and Samaria, redivide Jerusalem, and declare a binational state in the state of Israel. Right? We're not going to do that. We can't at all times satisfy American public opinion. We can't all the time even satisfy American Jewish opinion. We have strategic national interests which are paramount, but they should be taken into consideration. I'll give you one small example, which I think we're going to have a difference of opinion, not with Dennis, maybe with you, maybe with Victoria. It's this. Clearly, the Israeli-Saudi rapprochement, the possibility of achieving peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that is a paramount strategic national interest for both of our countries. The Saudis are not a democracy, but they do have public opinion, and they have to satisfy that public opinion. They can't afford to ignore that. They have to be able to show they're doing something for the Palestinians. They're not stupid. They know a Palestinian state created tomorrow that's going to turn into a Hamas state. It's going to bring down Jordan. It's going to bring down half the Gulf. They don't want that, but they have to show they're doing something. And what do they say? We should all be discussing what they call the P word, the pathway. Discover a pathway to a Palestinian state. And Israel, the government, has rejected that. I think for internal political means, they've rejected that. But it wouldn't hurt us at all to discuss a pathway. What is a pathway? A pathway is a thing with gravel. Okay? A pathway is a thing with flowers, those of you who live in suburbia. Discuss the pathway. Give the Saudis some cover. Give the people who are forging that agreement something to work with. And that will ultimately be, I think, in our interest. It'll redound to American interests as well. Last point, and I just want to say something about, add on something that Victoria was saying, that these countries have made peace with us in the past for two reasons. One was, strangely enough, because America was withdrawing from the Middle East. I used to say, Dennis, that that President Obama aspired to make peace between Israel and the Arabs through peace, right? Bring them closer together. He brought them closer together, but not through peace. He brought us closer together through combat opposition to his policies, particularly in Iran. And I don't think these countries wake up in the morning and necessarily love us. They don't sing Hatikva in the morning. They make peace with us because we're strong, because they're facing twin existential threats. Sunni extremism in the form of Hamas, Islamic Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Shiite extremism in the form of Iran and Hezbollah. We're the only country in the Middle East, frankly, we're the only country in the world that's standing up to both of them. And people have to understand that if we win this war, however you define winning it, if we are perceived as prevailing over Hamas and Hezbollah, the chances for peace will be greatly augmented. And I always want to say, forgive me. It's just the opposite of what they're saying on these campuses, that we're hurting peace. It's just the opposite. And forgive me, John Lennon, somewhere up in heaven, we got to give war a chance.
Dennis, I want to also ask you to answer about what the Israeli government can do more, not just this specific government, but in general, to keep the issue of the U.S.-Israel alliance bipartisan, but also because we're in election, because there's a hostage deal sort of on the table, because we heard yesterday Brett McGurk talking about maybe a diplomatic kind of solution for Lebanon, even though no one thinks that this is really something that could happen at this point. But do you think there's any chance we'll see a change before November 5th?
Before November 5th, I think the prospect of a change is pretty limited. Because I'm looking at the calculus of each of the actors. Yahya Sinwar on October 7th had an expectation that what he was doing, or what Hamas was doing, was going to provoke or instigate an all-out war between Hezbollah and Israel, that it would produce a complete uprising in the West Bank, and he thought it would also trigger within Israel the Israeli Arabs rising up. Now, none of that happened. Yes, Hezbollah began a limited conflict with Israel, meaning it was designed to be limited because Hezbollah didn't want an all-out war, but it was designed to impose a price on Israel without forcing Hezbollah to pay a terrible price, or at least one they weren't willing to tolerate. In the West Bank, the explosion didn't come, although the situation is getting increasingly dicey. And here I do think there is the behavior of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich is making that more likely, not less likely. And Smotrich's desire to see the Palestinian Authority collapse would be an absolute gift to Iran. There's nothing they would like more than to have a vacuum in the West Bank. And the Israeli Arabs, on the contrary, proved, that they actually are citizens of Israel. So, what he wanted didn't take place. But right now, he's hoping that what's happening between Israel and Hezbollah will become an all-out war. So his incentive in doing a deal, I think, is quite low at this point. Now, you asked, I want to say two things. One, I want to pick up on something that Michael said in answer to your question. Michael talked about embrace the idea of a pathway, which, by the way, helps you here because is Israel against peace? I'll ask you the question. Is Israel against peace? No. What do you think the image of a lot of people in this country is right now? That Israel is. Now, it doesn't take a lot to demonstrate, no, we're not the one who started October 7th. We're not the one who, from Lebanon, that started lobbing rockets into Israel. We would like a peace. Now, if you talk about a pathway, you are giving the Saudis a kind of explanation and cover. When I talk about a pathway, I talk about benchmarks. I'll tell you, I've been, I won't say who, but in a number of Arab states who said, look, we need to have a Palestinian state. And I asked them the question, so do you want a Palestinian state run by Hamas? Well, no. Do you want a Palestinian state that will be a member of the axis of resistance, meaning Iran's axis of resistance, actually what I call the axis of misery, because that's what they produce? And the answer, of course, is no. Do you want a Palestinian state that is a threat to Jordan? No. Do you want a Palestinian state that's going to be a failed state? No. So I said, okay, so what we're talking about is creating a series of benchmarks of Palestinian behavior that will allow us to know if there's going to be a Palestinian state, it is actually that is based on coexistence and not on resistance. And so that's one track. But you can't be asking for a pathway, and this gets me back to also the internal Israeli dynamic. Israel at the same time can't be taking steps that makes a Palestinian state impossible. So there are obligations on both sides. We should be talking about rights and responsibilities. The more Israel can do that, the more it will affect its image here. So if you ask me what can they be doing, yes, they're in the middle of a war that's been imposed on them. And yes, it is a war that's designed to end the state of Israel. And by the way, here, part of the challenge for everybody here is to keep the focus on that. And one of the things that is, for me at least, remains almost incomprehensible, we have Hamas. We have Hamas. We know what it did on October 7th, okay? You know, this was killing parents in front of kids, kids in front of parents, engaging in rapes, kidnapping people as young as 9 months old and as old as 85, incomprehensible, right? This is Hamas. I can tell you, in the 1990s when I was negotiating, every single time we made headway, or were in the process of making headway, what do we get? We got a Hamas bomb. Did we get a Hamas bomb because they wanted peace? Did we get a Hamas bomb because they wanted a two-state outcome? No, we got a Hamas bomb because they were afraid of that. Was October 7th tied to the fear that there was about to be Saudi normalization with Israel? I mean, there is a consistent pattern here. I can understand people being for the Palestinians. I cannot understand anybody being for Hamas. If you're for Hamas, it reflects a mindset that gets back, actually, Victoria, to what you were talking about. What's so much in the academic, that the U.S. and Israel are responsible, like, for all the conflicts in the world because there's a fundamental point of departure. Well, right, that's an ideology that has to be taken on. And that's a natural ideology for the U.S. and Israel to be taking on together.
We have time, thank you, Dennis, for one last question. So, Victoria, I want to ask you, we've heard from former President Trump here that if he was in office, this would not have happened. But I'm asking you, what do you think would be different if he got elected? How would he handle this differently than the current administration?
Well, no, this is something I've thought a great deal about, especially as we mark, twin anniversaries. Last Sunday we had the 4th anniversary of the signing of the Abraham Accords on the South Lawn of the White House, and in 3 weeks we have the anniversary of October 7th. And I can't say for certainty, I don't have a crystal ball, that October 7th wouldn't have happened during the Trump administration. I can say it didn't happen, but had President Trump been reelected, I don't know that we could have prevented it. But I do know the coordination between our administration and our counterparts in Israel it was not without occasional heated discussions, but it was pretty seamless. And the intelligence coordination, which is what appears to have broken down, was pretty close to seamless. And, we had code that we would use with each other. Now, don't make lots of weekend plans, that kind of thing. So there are things obviously you're not going to share, but our motto, if it was no daylight during the George W. administration, ours was no surprises. That we needed to have our discussions behind the scenes, not adjudicate matters in front of the scenes. And so, my hope would be that we could return to that kind of coordination and preempt any kind of additional attacks on this scale. And, the IDF announced yesterday that one of the reasons they've taken the actions they have in Lebanon is that Hezbollah was planning something called Conquer Galilee, an October 7th style event. And so this threat hasn't gone away. And I think, again, getting back to the institutionalization of the relationship, we can't be in a position where we have these intelligence failures, last point, because this is also an American problem. And we at the Heritage Foundation had a front row seat for the demonstrations in Washington in late July when the Prime Minister was here. And we could actually see them from my balcony, walk down to Union Station, and drag down 2 American flags and burn them. Those weren't Israeli flags. Those are American flags. So this is an American problem as well. The Hamas terrorists didn't ask for anybody's passport on October 7th, and they're still holding Americans hostage. So this is a problem for us as well.
Dennis, Victoria, Michael. We have to end with that. I wish we had more time, but thank you so much, and thank you for coming and being with us. Thank you.